actually gotten out our friendly pink big mouse pointer. I'd forgotten for the first two videos, but that's okay. So what we're doing and working on now is our advanced formulas and functions, right? So in this case, we're first going to work on our count if function. So remember, or let's work on our sum if function to get a grand total. So remember, count if, sum if, max if, average if, they all work the same way. Min if, no matter what you get, it all works the same way, right? So with the count if, I'm going to go into cell I6 and I'm going to count if or not count, I'm going to sum the total amount paid if it is in the auto renew sales type. And then I'll do the same for direct, group, and online, but I'll do that by copying down my formula. And you also have to be careful when you're working on this to check whether you're supposed to use any absolute cell referencing, and you have to check your functions to see whether you're using commas or semicolons, and for your decimals whether you're using commas or you're using full stops, right? So in this case, equals count, sum if. All right, so I can see that my function wants the range, the criteria, and then the sum range. The sum range is optional because you see the sum range is in square brackets showing that it's optional. And I know I'm separating my arguments with a semicolon because the screen tip is telling me that I'm separating my arguments with a semicolon. So my range is the range in which it's going to look for this auto renew, right? It's the range in which it looks for my criteria. So the range for which it will look for my criteria is this range C6 to C32 because that's where all the criterias are, which are the sales types. And then I move on by putting a semicolon to the criteria. You see criteria becomes bold, and this criteria is supposed to be, in this case, H6, right? Which is where my my first criteria is, which is auto renew. It's in cell H6. All right, and then my sum range is going to be the range I want to add up, which is cells E6 all the way down to E32. So if I were to use this formula here, you'd find that it'll work fine, but there's no absolute cell referencing. Why do I need absolute cell referencing? My range will always remain the same. It's always these cells here. My sum range will always be these cells here. But the only thing that needs to change is my criteria. So I need to make sure that my range is absolute cell reference. So if you select that, then press F4 on your keyboard. On the very top row of your keyboard, you press the button that says F4. And you see that it will make those absolute by putting $sign. You could manually type in those $signs by using Shift and 4. And then I also select this one and put in the $signs by pressing F4 once I select it. So now it tells me that for auto renew it's 2,908 rands. And I can copy down this formula and it will tell me the same for each of the different sales types. Okay, so that's a count if function. Max if works the same. It's a sum if function. Max if works the same, count if works the same. Count if is the only one that's be different because it won't give you a count range because it will just count in the criteria range, right? So it doesn't need a count range. So you might also be wondering, okay, how would I work with it if I needed a max ifs or a count ifs? So in this case, we're going to do a count ifs, right? So where we can count how many sales policies are both auto renew and how many sales are both auto renew as the sales type and the policy type being disability as well. And then I can do it for any one of these, right? So auto, for example, life and direct maybe, right? So this is how I can work with it. So here, if I say equals count ifs, because I've got two criteria now. So if you've got two or more criteria, you need to use count ifs with an S, right? So be careful of that as well. And I first thing I give it is the criteria range, right? So the criteria range is where it's going to look for example, disability or auto renew. So let's start off with the sales type, which is the criteria range there. And then you make it absolute by pressing F4 straight away. All right, semicolon to move on to the criteria one. The criteria one in this case, I'll give it cell H13, which is the one that has auto renew. And then criteria range 2 will be the policy types range. And I can make it absolute by pressing F4 straight away. And then the criteria 2 will be disability. So there we go. So if I use that, you'll see that the um, there's only two, and here I put it as rands. I just need to change my number formatting to number. All right, so it's two of the policies or the sales are auto renew and disability. All right, so if I copy it across, all right, and then copy it down, you see that I don't get any meaningful values, right? I get zeros throughout. The reason why I get zeros throughout is because I need to also work on the cell referencing so that there's mixed cell referencing to go across and mixed cell referencing to go down, right? So in this case, I wanted to remain in column H. So I need to put a dollar sign before H so it always remains in column H. And then in this case, I wanted to always remain in row 12. So I put a dollar sign before the 12. And then if I copy down this formula, you'll see it's now able to recognize the different policies. All right, because I've used mixed cell referencing. So now where there's zeros, it just means there's no policies that meet that criteria of being a disability and an online, or being a renter's policy and auto renew, right? So those just mean there's none. But because of my relative cell referencing, where my mixed cell referencing, where sometimes it's just a row that I want to remain absolute, like in this case, my row remains absolute because my policies are always in row 12. Whether I copy it down, the policies will always be in row 12. So I want it to be in row 12. And then here I make my H absolute because no matter where I copy this down to or copy it across to, my policies always remain in cell in column H. But the 13 can change because if I copy down, I wanted to move down to direct, I want to move down to group, I want to move down to online. And in this case, the column number, the column letters can change because this time I wanted to move across, move across, move across. That's why it's only the row that's absolute here and only the column that's absolute there. So that's how you also work with absolute cell referencing, like you saw there, mixed cell referencing there, where the column is absolute, and then mixed cell referencing where the row is absolute, right? So that's your count ifs function and just a bit of a recap on cell referencing. All right. And then next, we might want to use some of those formulas that we learned about that join words and pick stuff out of words. So for example, you could use the proper function if you wanted to turn a word into a proper noun, right? And then you could also use the concat function to join two words. Remember, there's the issue of the spaces, and then you can use the left and right functions to take out information that's on the left of of a certain group of text or on the right of a certain group of text. So let's talk about the concat function. So if I wanted to take this name, I am the reviewer, and I want to take this name and join it in here. So I'd say equals concat. And what you do is you take the first cell, C3, then you put in your semicolon. Remember, concat will join them together without putting a space. So now you need to put in your own space. So to put a space, you put open quotation marks, space, close quotation mark. And then that's your text2 argument. Now we go on to our text3 argument, which is the surname. All right, so when you press enter, you see that it fills that in correctly. Okay. So when you get this, you'll be able to see everything in there. And then the branch code, right? So let's say the branch code is the first two letters in the employee ID. So if I say equals left, and I want to get the first two letters on the left of that, I say text is E3, which is where I'm getting the text, and then number of characters is 2 to get that 62. So let's say on branch 62. The province code will say it's the last two letters of the employee ID. So we say equals right. And then we choose that E3, and then we take the last two characters. Okay. So that's something that you've seen in your mock test. It's something that you've seen in the in-class exercise. It's something that you've seen in your assignment for Excel. So those are your functions, your advanced functions, some of your advanced functions. So you can play around with these. You can try, instead of a count if here or count ifs here, you could do a max ifs. You could try a sum ifs, average ifs. You could also try average if here, count if there. So just to see how you are faring and whether you find the right information. And then there's also accounting functions, right? So the people that do BCom, any BCom modules and are doing accounting would find this a bit useful. So there's accounting functions to calculate loan payments, right? And then there's accounting functions to calculate depreciation payments. And then there's some financial calculations that you can use to see the financial performance of a company or an organization or of an investment. So firstly, we'll do the payments, right? So to calculate a monthly payment for a loan, we use our PMT function, equals PMT. So let me zoom in slightly so you can clearly see. So I'll use something like equals PMT. So this wants a rate, a number of periods, a principal value, and then sometimes you can give it a future value or a type, right? So in this case, the rate is going to be the monthly interest rate. You'll see that sometimes in brackets, you can see what the rate should be. Okay, so in this case, that'll be my rate. And then NPER is 60 months for my loan. And then PV is my loan amount of 750,000. So when I give it those arguments, it's enough. I don't need to give it a future value or a type. So when I press enter, it tells me that I'll be paying 13,897. So let's say I know I can only afford 13,800 and I want to see how much of a loan I can take at this interest rate for this amount of months. So I'd use a similar function. We say equals PV, and then I give it the rate. Remember, it has to be the rate in months if I'm looking at a monthly payment. And then I give it the number of periods. In this case, is 60. And then finally, instead of giving it a PV like the PMT function, we give it the actual PMT so it can calculate a PV for us. So there I give it the PMT. Remember, these two are optional, so we don't need to have them. So when I do that, it tells me that instead of 750, I should get 746. Okay. And then maybe you're choosing to take this loan as it is, this 750 loan, but you want to know what the future value of this loan will be. What is it going to be worth in the future? So I'd say equals FV for future value, and then I give it the rate, I give it the number of periods, and the PMT. PV, sorry, not, that's not my PMT. My PMT is this one. And then my PV is optional, but this time I do have it. So there I give it the PV. When you give it the PV, you also want to give it a type. So the type could be end of period. People usually pay off their loans at the end of the period, not at the start of the period. So we choose end of period. So you just double click on that or you just type a 0. All right. And I press enter. It tells me how much the future value would be, right? Or how much it gets inflated by, basically. So that's the loan payment functions. These are the simple ones, right? And there's also the cumulative loan payments, all right? So the cumulative payments is where you want to calculate, okay, over the first 12 months of my loan from period 1 to period 12, right? How much did I pay, right? That's CUMI PMT. Over period 1 to period 12, how much of my principal have I paid off? That's your cumulative principal. So you'd say equals QME PMT like that. And then you'd give it the rate as usual. You also give it the number of periods for the whole loan. And then you give it the PV, which is the loan amount. You tell it the start period, which is period 1. You tell it the end period, period 2. And then you tell it the type of loan, end of period, 0. Right? So you see that your QME PMT, using all of these things here, it knows that you've paid 4,000 over the year. All right? And then here equals QME principal, or is it, doesn't have an I? There we go. And then you give it the rate as usual, NPER, number of periods, and then the PV, loan amount, and then the start period 1 to the end period, and then you can put in your 0 for a end of month loan, like that. All right, so it tells you that of the principal you'd have paid off, or the principal that you should have paid off, or is attributed to this year, is 7,907. Okay, so those are your loan calculations and your loan functions. Now we also have depreciation calculations that you might be interested in. Straight line is easy. It just equals SLN. And for a straight line, you just need the cost, the salvage value, and the life, expected life of the asset. All right. No matter what period you're in, those that do accounting will know that no matter what period you're in, the depreciation amount for a um, that we give to a the depreciation amount for a straight line when you're using straight line is just always going to be the same. Then there's the reducing balance. The formula for that is equals dB for reducing balance or depreciating balance, and then depleting balance. You give it the cost, you give it the salvage value, you give it the life, and then you tell it what period you're in. So when year 1, and sometimes you can tell it what month you're in, because remember you just then divided by the number of months of that year, right, if it wasn't a full year. So there we go. That would be the amount of depreciation in the first year, and as it goes on each and every other year, accounting people will tell you that the balance will reduce because it's reducing as the years go by. Then there's this method that I've never seen when I did accounting, but it's called the sum of years digits. It just equals SYD, and you give it the cost, salvage, and the life, as well as the period. Right, so we tell the year 1, right, and it will calculate for us, right? So these two, the two below, reducing balance and SYD, reduce or deplete as the years go by as you use your asset. And then next we have some financial calculations. So NPV is the net present value of your investment. So for that function, it's just equals NPV. If you want to find out what it means, you can Google it. All right. The rate you'll be given here, 10%. So you are investing there and you want to gain 10% from it, or I don't know what that would mean, right? So you can Google it to understand the NPV a bit more in terms of what it means financially, right? I can teach you how to calculate it, but financially, I can only say limited stuff. I do know a bit, but not enough. All right, and then you give it the values of the investment. So the first value is how much is paid into the investment, and then the other values are the return. So you give it all of the values like that. It tells you that the NPV is 3,108, and then you added this to your initial investment or something like that to get how much you're going to make from this investment, I think. And then the IRR is like the rate of return, right? How much are you gaining? What's the return on your investment? So equals IRR, and then you give it the values, and you can give it a guess, but you just give it the values usually, and it'll tell you what percentage gain you've made from this investment over the years or over the periods. Okay, so those are the advanced functions that you can work with. Remember to be to use this guide so that you don't panic, right? Use this guide to show you what you need to put into your function. All right, thank you for watching. This was a bit of a long one, but I think it's the one that has a lot of stuff.